Hello, Rubicon Ranger here, and I've got a question for you. Do you have the need for speed? Have you ever wanted to go illegally fast in Robocraft 2? Before you, I have the 10-speed dumpster train. Now, normally, a single grid in Robocraft 2 has a limited amount of power. So there's an artificial kind of engine associated with each grid in the game, and the more wheels you put on your bot, the more mechanical losses are associated with that. So just like in a real car, if you had the same sized engine and you added more and more wheels, it wouldn't get faster, it would get slower because you have mechanical losses associated with extending the drivetrain. And what they've tried to do in Robocraft 2 is much the same thing. They've taken, and each grid has a limited amount of power that can be divided amongst all the wheels. So having fewer wheels actually makes you go faster. But that is not the case for this here 10-speed dumpster train. Let's see what it does. Let's go for a trip. So, the 10-speed dumpster train is pretty heavy. It's made out of the light material, but it is like pretty much a solid brick. And the wheels themselves have, pretty generous weights associated with them. So it's safe to say that something that's longer than the subordinator should probably not be going this fast, this illegally fast. So why is this happening? Well, since each subgrid has its own engine, I am basically using a main grid with 3 steering wheels and then 8 subgrids, each which have their own engine, one for each of the 8 kind of side wheels here, to get better acceleration. So let's talk about that and some of the upsides and downsides of it, because this isn't just something that has no downsides, that's like completely 100% exploitable. There are major downsides to doing this kind of thing. So let's talk about how I've got this set up and some of the downsides to builds like this. So the trick here is simply that the 8 side wheels that are associated with the body here each have their own kind of subgrids, so they're not attached to the main grid. And you can see in the upper left of my screen I'm using 9 out of 10 grids that are allowed in the game. And that's because each of my 8 wheels is independent from the main body of the vehicle. And there's a couple problems here that you have to overcome if you want to build something like this. One is the wheels themselves don't interact well with the main body. They don't provide the same traction, and you have to, mechanically constrain them so that they can provide power to the main body. So how am I doing that? So in my case, what I've done is I basically got kind of a T shape here, and it slots into a portion of the body, which just has like kind of a third block in between it and the rest of the body, which makes it so that it's constrained. It can, it can't rotate, and it can tilt up and down. It can rotate a little bit and tip up and down a little bit, but it's basically constrained. And then to get it even further constrained, I press it against the floor with a piston. So this piston assembly, it's not the best assembly. I had to be very careful with how much I spent on each of these assemblies to get as many wheels as I did. But there's this kind of long T-shaped piece in the middle here that presses down on the inside of each of these wheel mounts and kind of presses it against the floor. Now this isn't exactly where I wanted it initially, because the floor presses up on the wheel and the wheel assembly wants to rotate this way. So pressing down here really shouldn't help that much. In fact, ideally you'd want to press down right here, right, because it's going to want to torque around this point like that. So if you press down here, it would probably be better. But it's still, just due to the way the physics are set up, this pressing the whole assembly against the floor still gets the wheels to engage a little bit better. Another trick I've used is I've got the wheels that are actually on the main body. So there's 3 wheels that are associated with the main body of the craft that aren't on independent subgrids. So there's 2 rear steering wheels, and then I've got one in the nose for steering as well. And those are all mounted lower or higher than the wheels that are independent from the body, so that the body has a chance to kind of sink down on these wheels a little bit more. Since they're mounted lower, like this, that makes up for the third of a gap here. You're going to notice it's mounted a third higher than the independent wheels, so that it's more likely to rest on these and they're going to get better traction. So what are the downsides of doing this kind of setup? Why isn't everybody doing this right now? Well, mostly because the benefit versus the cost of this kind of setup and the lack of control that you get when you're on lower health might not be worth it. And I'll show you what I mean. So if I go to this setup and I take off, so you can, if I switch map here, we're going to go to this map, and then we're going to remove, well, so first let me show you how it steers on its own. And the only reason why this steers so well is because I've toyed with it to get it to steer as best as I can. And pretty much all of the wheels that are independent from the body, including the front, basically the back wheels steer one way and all the other wheels steer the opposite direction. And that seems to work the best out of any setup I've tried so far. And you can see we can get some pretty good speed here and still manage to steer by kind of like tapping on the steering. So it's not too bad. It doesn't slide around too much, but let me tell you, those independent wheels do not generate any steering traction or sideways forces. They don't translate that into the body very well. So let me show you what happens when I take the front wheel off and it no longer can steer as well. So we're going to remove the front wheel and we're going to try again. And I'll show you what I mean by the independently mounted wheels not having very good steering friction. So coming off of the pad here, I'm going to start trying to steer, and you immediately see I'm kind of just sliding if I hold it. But if I tap it, I can steer a little bit. Problem is when I get up to speed, you can see I'm just kind of sliding all over the place. It is still steerable, so at lower speeds you can kind of point yourself, and that's no problem. But once you get up to speed, steering is next to impossible due to how this thing slides around. So having a setup with these wheels, you're pretty much sacrificing the additional power you might gain from any of those singular wheel assemblies for lack of control further down the line when you lose your steering wheels, if you're using them at all. But the advantage being that you can go pretty darn fast. So I feel like there's probably a better way to, use a setup like this than what I've done here. There's probably diminishing returns on, how much power you actually get out of those small wheel assemblies, but I'm not entirely sure. Maybe more steering wheels is better. So let's see what the kind of extremes that you can go to and still get benefits out of this. So let me go back and check out one that's made out of the pure heavy material. So one upside is it could be used for, extremely heavy vehicle. Since you can only really turn at slow speeds once you've lost the front wheel, you might as well just use it for, a giant lead brick. So here we've got the Latium material, and you can see it's actually, for how solid it is, this is actually not too bad. Anybody who's actually used the super heavy material before knows that for something this size, this is actually moving pretty quick. So you could, I think vehicles that have the most to benefit from this kind of setup are probably the heavier vehicles, because any sort of steering issues at high speed, you won't run into because you don't go that fast to begin with. Now, of course, you're still going to have trouble I can barely get up these slopes in a chaos, but if I were to go down to these slopes, I can't get out of here once I'm in here. So not enough traction. So there's how you can use kind of sub-assemblies to get better speeds. Hopefully this was interesting and it's given you some ideas about how you might want to set up similar builds. Whether or not this is beneficial over using your CPU for something else, I don't know. That's up to you. But this is probably as much as you're going to get out of it. Well, I'd be interested to see what everybody comes up with all this information out there. Hopefully someone makes something interesting and we can all take it in a new direction. Have a good day.